Here's William Lane Craig to react to Jordan Peterson's attempt to debate 20 atheists. This is his response to Peterson's claim that atheists don't understand the God they're rejecting.
Let me say two things about this. First, Sean, I think that the claim is very plausibly true. I think that atheists generally don't have the concept of God as a maximally great being, a being that is necessary, self-existent, eternal, spaceless, immaterial.
Peterson doesn't seem to have that concept of God either. He said previously that God is one's deepest instinct or something like that. It seems he conceives of God as simply being one's conscience. That's why he says that people who call themselves atheists are not really atheists unless they act like complete psychopaths. In a sense, I agree with Craig that I don't conceive of God as a timeless, spaceless creator of the universe because I can't conceive of such a thing. Having location in space-time seems to be the very definition of existence, so as far as I can tell, the idea of a timeless, spaceless being is a contradiction.
Perfectly good. They do not generally have this sort of majestic, philosophically rich concept of God.
Well, this is precisely the concept of God that I am rejecting.
The philosopher David Hunt once remarked to me that he thinks that God is a lot more like Plotinus I than like Zeus. And I think for many atheists, God is more like Zeus than he is like Plotinus I.
I think to the authors of the Old Testament, God is more like Zeus. That's why he seems to be depicted as a physical guy who shares our image and walks around the Garden of Eden, presumably on two legs. He's depicted as anthropomorphically as Zeus is. The God depicted in Genesis doesn't bear much resemblance to Plotinus's concept of the One, a basic ground of all existence, either. The ground of all existence doesn't walk around places.
And I would say, Sean, frankly, that this is a case for Christians as well, that most Christians do not have a very full-orbed, philosophically deep concept of God. So if Christians don't even understand what God is like, how much more is that true for the average non-believer? Now, the second thing, though, that I'd like to comment on this is that this claim, whether true or false, is just irrelevant to the truth of Christian theism. The issues that Jordan Peterson has chosen to talk about are sociological, historical claims.
Yeah, Peterson is far more concerned about how important he thinks religion is to a functioning society. He seems to think that rejecting the idea of God is to reject civilization itself.
That you could go either way with. The Christian faith, if true, doesn't imply either the affirmative or the negative answer to these questions. So in that sense, I don't think these are really the important questions that he's raising. These are tangential questions because they're ultimately irrelevant to the truth of Christian theism.
Craig is rightly pointing out that Peterson is effectively making an argument ad consequentiam. Even if it were the case that rejecting God somehow led to civilizational collapse, that would not prove that God exists.
There's no discussion in this exchange about arguments for God's existence, no discussion of evidence for the reliability of the Gospels and Jesus. Instead, we get these socio-historical sorts of questions, which isn't surprising because Dr. Peterson is a psychiatrist, after all.
He's actually a clinical psychologist. Psychiatrists are MDs, and Peterson only has a PhD. Clinical psychologists can give some treatment to patients, but they can't prescribe medication. Next, Craig reacts to Peterson's claim that explaining the evolution of morality and explaining morality are not the same thing.
Dr. Craig, this clip is rooted in Peterson's second prompt, namely that morality and purpose cannot be found within science. What do you make of this contention and this interaction?
Again, I think that the contention is obviously true.
I agree in a sense. It seems very common that when theists challenge atheists to explain morality, they conflate explanations with justifications. When Peterson says that explaining the evolution of morality is not the same thing as explaining morality itself, I think he means that the fact that you can scientifically explain why morality exists doesn't ultimately justify any moral commands or system. I agree that science can't do this, but I don't think theism can do it either because there is no non-circular justification for doing what God says.
Science doesn't explore ethics. That's a totally different discipline than the exploration of the natural physical world. So what he's saying is obviously true, I think, and most ethicists would concur. Unfortunately, I don't think he does a very good job of defending his thesis against the challenges of his interlocutor. What the challenger wants to say is that in virtue of our being social animals, there has evolved a kind of herd morality among Homo sapiens, which is useful in the perpetuation of our species. And so it gets selected for by biological evolution. And you see similar patterns of cooperation among other social animals like pigs and elephants, for example.
I think it's entirely sensible to say that this does, in fact, explain morality. The only way you can deny that it does is if you conflate explanations with justifications. Next, they show the clip of someone asking Peterson if he believes in the all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good notion of God. And Peterson asks, "What do you mean by believe?" And the other guy says, "Do you think it to be true?" And Peterson says that's a circular definition because it just substitutes believe for another word. This is very silly because citing a synonym is a perfectly legitimate way to define a word. If you ask me what the word large means and I say that it means big, that is obviously not a circular definition. Then Peterson claims that to believe something means that you live for it and you die for it.
This is exactly what came to my mind, Sean. He is describing as belief acting as if your life depended on it. And this is consistent with pretending.
This makes Peterson's assertion that Sam Harris is not really an atheist because he's not an atheist in his actions make more sense. Peterson has a behaviorist conception of belief. It's not a state of mind as most people would conceive of a belief, it's a behavior. And Craig is right that by this definition of belief, you can believe in God simply by pretending that God exists. In fact, Peterson has elsewhere said that he acts as though God exists, which sounds an awful lot like he is in fact pretending. In a later clip, Peterson says that everyone worships something, and he defines worship as attend to, prioritize, and sacrifice for, which seems to me like an absurdly broad definition. By that definition, most parents worship their children. Peterson also says that he hasn't claimed to be a Christian, and the guy he's talking to then quite sensibly asks what he's doing in a video about a Christian debating atheists.
You know, in some ways, Bill, this was maybe the most interesting clip to me because this moment was kind of inevitable. As you know, you've been on stage with Peterson, I believe, in different settings, that people have been wondering, where does he stand on God? Where does he stand on the resurrection? Even atheists like Dawkins and O'Connor have been in conversation with him, pressing him, does he think these stories are actually true? And he's been evasive for a while about his beliefs.
It's awfully tempting to think that Peterson wants the cultural benefits of participating in Christianity without committing to what Christianity actually says. I don't think he conceives of God the way Craig does, as being a timeless, spaceless, disembodied person who created the universe. I think he conceives of God as a kind of ultimate Jungian archetype. Archetypes are tropes that Carl Jung believed were hardwired into all human brains, and Peterson seems to think that the reason why Christianity is so popular is because it resonates with a lot of these hardwired tropes. His lectures about the Bible and meaning all seem to imply this. When he talks about Bible stories, he unpacks what he believes are the Jungian archetypes that they contain. To Peterson, God is an idea that evolution has programmed into us rather than the timeless, spaceless entity that Craig believes in.
And if you're not a Christian, that makes sense. Or if you're a Christian, it's fine to be evasive about like the imprisoned spirits in 1 Peter chapter 3. But if you're a Christian, you cannot be evasive about professing Christ before people.
Well, that's true.
I mean, that is very clear. So to me, I think this made it clear for those of us who wondered where Jordan Peterson stands. He's not there yet, implying I hope he gets there.
Let's be careful not to judge.
Okay.
Sean, we don't know his heart. He's certainly evasive. And I think that that's deliberate myself. If I were his publicity agent, I would say be as evasive as you can. Do not answer the question.
Okay.
So long as he
Okay.
keeps evading it, that evokes the mystery, that promotes the controversy. You said this is one of the most watched clips in the whole program. Why? Because of this evasion, where if he were to just come out and say, I am a Christian and I believe in Jesus, my Lord, the mystery would be gone, the controversy over, it would be boring after that. So
Perhaps Craig is right that Peterson is just being evasive as a means of rage baiting people into giving him attention. I think he actually just doesn't want to admit that he doesn't believe what the vast majority of Christians believe, but he wants to grift them nonetheless.
this is very deliberate, I think. And we have to be careful not to judge whether in his heart of hearts he hasn't yet come to believe in Christ, but he's still a baby Christian and doesn't have it all together yet, or maybe finds it to his advantage to be evasive. But
If that's the case, then his evasiveness is just a strategic grift.
To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.